Hey everyone, my name is Zach Wright. Welcome to the Masterclass, where we're going to be talking about strategy management. And more specifically, we're going to be diving into detail on how to unite the teams to execute your strategy using the specific framework, objectives, and key results. So before we dive into it, you might be asking, why should I care what this guy has to say? Well, I wanted to tell you a little bit about the company and then dive straight into the details here. But my company is IMEO, which stands for Improving Management, Employees, and Organizations. And our goal is to improve the way leaders and employees interact with one another through our strategic approach to strategy execution or strategy management with objectives and key results, or OKRs. We help companies build and implement their OKR program to better manage their performance, increase productivity, and enhance employee engagement. So, why are we so obsessed with strategy management? Well, these two statistics here that you can see on the screen is one of the big reasons why we care so much and wanted to do this masterclass. So, first of all, let's go ahead and define strategic management. It's the process of setting goals, procedures, and objectives in order to make a company or organization more competitive. Typically, strategic management looks at effectively deploying staff and resources to achieve the goals that they have as a company. Now, the reason that I wanted to start with the definition is because a lot of people know about strategic planning. They know a lot about strategy, mission, and vision, but they don't necessarily know what comes after all that planning, because without an action, a plan is just a plan. So before we go into the assumptions for this masterclass, let's look at the numbers here. $1 million is wasted every 20 seconds by organizations around the globe due to ineffective implementation of their business strategy. Now, that's provided from the Project Management Institute, but $1 million, think about that for a moment, every 20 seconds. That is huge if you don't take the time to go from strategic planning to strategy management or strategy execution. And then this next statistic is 67%. Now, this comes from HBR, or Harvard Business Review. It's estimated that 67% of well-formulated strategies failed due to poor execution. Now, the reason we're starting here with these statistics is not to scare you, but to make sure that you understand, as we go through this masterclass, the importance of strategic management. So I hope that we set the scene and we're ready for you to take on this lesson that you can take away and apply to your organization as soon as possible. So before I go into strategy to OKRs, let's talk about what I'm assuming for this master class. You already have a strategy for your company. Your objectives are clearly defined or identified. You've communicated this out to your employees. So as long as you have that ready, then we're good to go to continue. Now, what we're going to focus on is how to turn your strategy into a method that can be measured and achieved. And hopefully, if we do it correctly, you'll be able to walk away and apply this to your company today. Okay, so let's break down the key terms that you're going to want to know as we proceed through this presentation. Also, whenever you go to implement your objectives and key results. So first, what is strategy? Even though I mentioned that a lot of people know strategy, they don't actually look at the definition to really understand if they're doing it correctly. So strategy, as it says here on the screen, a strategy is a general plan or set of plans intended to achieve something, especially over a long period of time. Now, to get a little bit more specific, that long period of time can be anywhere from 2 years to 5 years to 10 years. It really depends on your industry. If you are in e-commerce, you're more of a transactional approach. So maybe you need to adapt your strategy a little bit quicker because the industry is moving faster. Or maybe you're in the government sector and those don't move as quickly. So maybe you have a longer term strategy that you're building upon to make sure that you're achieving what you're setting out to. But as I mentioned before, a strategy is a general plan. It's what you intend to achieve. It's understanding the market industry or the market analysis with a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, or a needs assessment, by also looking at what you've already accomplished. And then from where you have been and where you are currently, where are you trying to go? That is your strategy. Now, then we come into strategy as a plan to strategy as an action or a way to be measured and to ensure that progress is being made. That's where objectives and key results come into play. So if you're not familiar with OKRs, what we see here is the objective is simply what is trying to be achieved. It's no more, no less. So objectives are better when they are inspirational to drive momentum in adoption and increase energy for execution. So it's that statement like JFK had whenever he was president, and he was talking about putting a man on the moon for the first time. That's an objective. It's what we're trying to accomplish. Now, when we go into key results, what we're looking at is the benchmark. This is the benchmark and monitoring how we get to the objective or how we're going to accomplish what we're trying to achieve. Now, it's a key call out here that effective key results are specific, they're time bound, they're aggressive yet realistic, but most of all, as Marissa Mayer will say, former exec at Google and CEO of Yahoo, or former CEO of Yahoo, will say that it's not really a key result if it's not measurable, meaning that there's a quantitative approach or way to measure what you're trying to achieve. Now, there is another way that you can have key results, which is binary, which means we either did this or we did not do this. It's a black or white answer, no in between. So that is objectives and key result. The objective is the what, the key result is the how. But let's look at where OKRs falls into the strategy or the mission and the vision of the company. So everything that goes into your strategy should come from your vision and your mission. And then what we like to do is we break that down into our strategy. And then that strategy then becomes the direction or the North Star of what we put into our objectives and key results, or what we're going to focus on. Now, another call out for OKRs is that you're taking your strategy and you're breaking it down into an annual basis. And then even further from that, you're taking your annual objectives, the next 365 days, and breaking it down into quarterly objectives. Now, you might have heard the term reverse engineering. That's exactly what we're talking about here. We have the big picture of what we're trying to achieve as a company with our strategy, and then we shrink that down to make it tangible on what do we have to focus on right now in this quarter to get closer to the strategy, to get closer to the mission, to get closer to the vision. Now, if you really want to take it a step further, you can turn your objectives and key results, because those are outcomes, you can turn those into actual to-do action plans. Now, that's a step further we won't go into today, but we can go into it in another video if that is something of interest. Now, the other key factors of objectives and key results is that you're not just creating things that are trying to become outcomes, you're also measuring and tracking those. Now, whenever it comes to measuring and tracking your OKRs, there's a certain scoring methodology that goes along with it. So OKRs are stretch goals, meaning that you don't have to hit 100% on the goals, it means that you have to hit 70% or above for it to be seen as a success. Now, this is where OKRs get a little confusing for people who are used to KPIs, because you want to meet 100% of your KPIs. But the theory, and it's been tested and proven with stretch goals, is that it allows your employees to take risk. And when employees are able to take risk, they're able to stretch further than their perceived limitations. Meaning, if they were trying to close 10 deals and that's their quota, but their OKR is, I want to close 15 deals, what you'll find oftentimes is that employee will close somewhere above 10 deals and below 15 deals. And if it was just a KPI where they were only focused on 10, they might have stopped there. So that's the importance of stretch goals and OKRs. Now, on the tail end of OKRs in a quarterly time-bound metric is you have a final score towards the end of the quarter, and you don't just let that be. You do what we call an OKR retrospective. Now, if you're familiar with Agile, we do Agile retrospectives where we can see what went well, what didn't go so well, and then how can we move forward. It's the same exact thing with OKRs. We're looking at our objectives and key results, seeing where we succeeded, asking ourselves why we succeeded, seeing where we failed or we didn't get as far as we wanted to, asking why that was the case. And then we also ask an additional question, which is this objective or key result relevant? Is it still relevant? If not, then we shouldn't bring that over into the next quarter. So that's another aspect of OKRs, which is they're flexible and they adapt as you adapt as a company and as the market adapts too. So this is the OKR strategy breakdown and the approach to OKRs from vision to report and learn. Now you might be asking, what does the workflow look like of objectives and key results? And then after this slide, we'll go into 5 steps to actually implement your OKRs. But what this looks like, and then you're going to do this every single quarter, is you're going to create the company OKRs. Now that's going to be using the strategy to identify the annual objectives. So the next 365 days, what are you trying to accomplish? And then you're going to break that down even further to your quarterly OKRs. Now, you only do one quarter at a time. So let's say that we have our 365-day strategy and OKR planned out. Now we're going to break that down into the next 90 days. Let's say it's Q1. So Q1, we're going to go from January to March. And that is going to be our time frame that whenever we create our objectives and key results, that's what we're focused on achieving at that moment. So you create the company OKRs. It always has to start at the top, and we'll go into why that is with our cascading OKRs methodology. And then once you have your company OKRs, you're going to cascade that down to the leaders and the teams. They're going to create their objectives and key results. And then you're going to have a way to track and measure your OKRs. And also, you're going to score them monthly. And we'll go into 4 best practices on how you can make sure that that happens, as well as make sure that they're top of the mind throughout the quarter and not just monthly or quarterly. Now, once we have everything completed at the end of that 90-day cycle, we're going to be looking at scoring and presenting that progress to the entire company. This is not something that you want to just keep in as a management team or a leadership team. You want to share it with your employees. One of the things that I think organizations often misconceive on is that they don't need to bring in their employees because they know what needs to happen. That to me is a big mistake. Bring in your employees, have them speak, because they're on the front lines talking to your customers, or they're on the front lines building your product. Whatever the case is, make sure that you bring them into that all hands and present the successes, the failures, or the not so goods, and then talk about what really needs to be accomplished in that next quarter. Then in that next quarter, you're going to start to create your new OKRs that compounds on one another, meaning that you take the results from the last quarter and you understand the successes, the failures, and then you build upon that in Q2. How can we compound the success that we had in Q1 into Q2? And then how can we really ramp up where we failed, but we need to still focus on these goals into Q2? So it really is building that compounding effect. So each goal grows with interest over time, which goes into that ability to have increased productivity and better performance with OKRs. Now, what we want to talk about here on this slide is 5 steps to your OKRs. Now, this is really where we excel as a company because we want to make sure that everybody speaks the same language, understands OKRs as a whole, and then everybody in the company knows what they need to do as an expectation of management or a management of expectations. So first, what we're talking about here is education and timeline. That's the first step. So the goal here is to have everyone speak in the same language, as I mentioned before. We want to talk about OKRs as the framework. What is the process? What is the framework of OKRs? And then how do you create OKRs? What is the terminology? Every single thing included, because we believe with change management, any type of change management or goal setting, it's a lot easier to get people to adopt this framework whenever they know what you're talking about, instead of throwing it at them, helping them learn while creating. We want them to learn and then we create. So now the second part is develop your roadmap or your strategy and OKRs. So this goal is to envision your goals for the year at a high level and break down those goals into quarterly OKRs to be measured. That's something that we really went into detail earlier. Then we're going to have check-ins and cadences. This is where the 4 best practices come into play. But our main goal here is to measure the goals that have been set throughout the quarter to ensure progress is being made in the right direction. The issue that I have with KPIs or any other goal setting frameworks out there is that there's not a consistent framework or process to make sure that employees or managers are checking in on a monthly basis or even more often, right? So that's what I mean by check-ins and cadences. You want to establish what your check-in cadence is going to be for your organization. So then you can present that to the team and they're not looking around or wondering, when do I need to check on my OKRs or when do I need to update my OKRs? Typically for us, we're going to have this to happen at the beginning of each month. And then the final scoring, which is the 4th step here, is going to be at the very end of the quarter or at least 2 weeks before the quarter ends. So that way you can have a finalization of the scoring to understand everything that you accomplished in that quarter, and then start to use that review to build into the 5th step here, which is build into that new quarter of OKRs. But for 4, our goal is to review what happened in this quarter and how much progress was made, what needs to be changed, and share the results to celebrate, plus reflect on what can become better. And then for the 5th, the strategic plan for the new quarter or the development of your next quarter's OKRs is to reflect on the previous quarter's progress or lack of progress to prepare the next quarter's goal with a compounding approach to ensure continued success. So what we're going to look at here is not about the framework or the strategy breakdown of OKRs or even the terminology. We're going to talk about how Google helped popularize objectives and key results and the benefits that they've seen. So just to do a quick review, Andy Grove started out with management by objectives or MBOs. And from there, John Doerr came into Intel, which Andy Grove was the CEO of, and started to add certain features to MBOs, which is the key results. Because with management by objectives, you only had the what you're trying to accomplish, but you didn't have the how. So John Doerr came into play and closed that gap of now we know what and now we know how. And that's what makes them so powerful as a structure for strategy management. And John Doerr was an early investor of Google. And he brought the idea to Larry and Sergey, who were the CEOs of Google at the time. And they said, well, we don't have anything else. Why not? And with that why not approach, John Doerr was able to implement OKRs into the entire organization at Google. Now you can see this, right? I kind of made a joke of it. Have you ever heard of Google? I think that you have to be living under a rock or not have the internet to not know who Google is. And so when John Doerr came on, they had 40 employees. And as they grew into the conglomerate that we know now, they grew with OKRs from 40 employees to 60,000 employees. And the power of the OKRs, as we see here on the screen, is that it ensured that the company stayed aligned and focused on their objectives. Now, the importance of that is whenever you have a strategy and you break that down into the framework of objectives and key results, you only want to have 3 to 5 objectives. And then underneath those objectives, you only want to have 3 to 5 key results. Now, we like it whenever there's less objectives and less key results because you're narrowing your focus, right? You're setting the North Star and you're breaking it down and becoming very narrow in what you need to focus on. Now, as an employee, that increases or enhances employee engagement because they know exactly what they need to execute to be able to help their manager meet their goals. And then their manager knows what they need to focus on so they can help their leaders meet their goals. And if their leaders meet their goals, then they ultimately help the company meet their objectives and key results. And by being able to understand that, that helps ensure the company stays aligned and focused on the appropriate objectives. And by having the retrospective, it's making sure that each quarter we're staying focused on what we need to. So the other call out that I wanted to say here for the power of OKRs is that these companies didn't start using OKRs when they became larger. They used OKRs to become huge. And what I mean by that is whenever there's a startup or a small business with the goal or the intention to become huge, they start to take on different tasks that gets them distracted. And then they grow rapidly and it makes them misaligned. And that's what OKRs do. They keep you avoiding misalignment and being distracted because they tell you or they help tell you exactly what needs to happen at the company. Now, how did OKRs help companies like Netflix, Google, Airbnb, or Amazon? And there's tons out there. I could keep naming them. But the framework keeps everybody in the company aligned and focused on the most important goals. That's the key thing here, the most important goals. Because there's other goals that pop up. And if you take on them slowly, then you start to understand or realize too late that you veered off the direction that you needed to really focus on to accomplish what you're trying to as a company. So just to call that out, that those companies didn't start using OKRs when they became bigger, they used OKRs to become huge, is a key thing for this audience, I believe, because we look at OKRs and we see these big names like Netflix, Google, Airbnb, Amazon, so on and so forth, and we think, oh, that will never work for my company. Well, I'm here to say that that's incredibly wrong. You actually start with OKRs to be able to create that alignment. And as you expand into more employees, into more customers, you stay aligned without having to be a micromanager. OKRs helps a leader, a CEO, a founder, a manager, a director, whatever the case is, it helps them understand where everybody in the company stands. Are you making the right progress? Yes or no? If not, as a leader, you go and speak to your employee about that. You coach them. You help them. You reach across aisles and you bring in people who are working on similar things, who are being successful where this employee might not be. And then you raise the average of the entire company instead of just raising the average of a single individual employee. Now, hopefully I'm not getting too passionate about this, but let's talk about why companies use OKRs. John Doerr, in his book, Measure What Matters, which I highly recommend if you're interested in adopting OKRs, talks about how OKRs actually has superpowers. Now, if you look at this on the screen, there's 4 superpowers: focus and commit to priorities. And these are some of the things that we've already talked about, but they help you choose what matters most. Superpower number 2 is they align and connect for teamwork. So these goals are public. They're transparent. Everybody in the organization can see what each department or each individual's goals are. And the beauty in that is if somebody else is working on this, it doesn't become redundant, but it becomes a collaborative effort where these people or these 2 departments can work together. And that's where achieving goals faster comes into play, because you don't have 2 silos in many cases with KPIs where 2 different departments are working on the same thing and they don't know about it. You actually have a collaborative effort where 2 departments are working on the same thing, but they're working on them together and they achieve that goal faster as a result. Okay, superpower number 3, track for accountability. OKRs help us monitor progress and course correct. Now, we've talked about the progress and monitoring that, but the course correction is whenever we are looking at our employees' OKRs during an interquarterly scoring or a monthly scoring approach, and we see that they have a roadblock that they've hit and they need help, or we see that we're not going to focus on this objective and key result because it's no longer a priority. Right? So you can course correct where OKRs are very flexible to match what your goals are, right? And which is very important for growing companies and companies who are just starting up, just trying to figure out what it is that they need to do. So track for accountability. Another way to track for accountability is you can also create a baseline if you don't have your metrics. I have a lot of people come to me and say, Zach, can we adopt OKRs at an early stage? And the answer is yes. And they say, well, we don't have any metrics. How can we really do that? Your first objective and key result can be to establish a baseline in that first 90-day cycle. And then the second cycle becomes where you try to improve your baseline based off of that first quarter into the second quarter. Now, superpower number 4 is stretch for amazing. Again, I'm going to use the JFK reference. JFK's objective was to put a man on the moon for the first time ever. And that seemed impossible at the time. But what came of it? NASA was created. We started focusing and building technology on how to do these things. So the key results became things like NASA, became aerospace developments, became technological advancements in certain areas. That's what we mean by stretch goals. Now, we've mentioned cascading OKRs a little bit, but I have a diagram that I want to talk to you about in the next slide. And then I even break it down a little bit further in that following slide after that one. So first of all, what are cascading OKRs? All goals are created from the company's objectives and key results, helping everyone move forward together. And the benefit of this is that when all departments leverage the same goals, alignment and focus are set from the beginning. I think you can start to get the theme of why OKRs are so important. They're keeping the community and culture of the organization aligned and focused on what matters most, avoiding that misalignment and distractions that we often see from growing companies. Now, I mentioned I have a diagram here. This is an example of what it would look like. So you're starting out over here with the blue circle of your company OKRs. Nobody in the organization can create their OKRs until the company has clearly identified what it is that we need to accomplish, what it is that we need to focus on. And then literally everybody else in the organization cascades that goal down from the company's goals. So we start with the company, we go into the executive leadership team, then we go into the departmental leaders, so VPs and directors, then we go into the management and leadership teams, and then we go all the way down to the individual contributors. Now, you can stop a level higher than this image or diagram shows. You can stop at the team level and have everybody rally around that team level. If you do that, I think it would be very important for you to have action plans that your employees take on just below. So they might not have objectives and key results individually, but they have these specific action plans that they plan on accomplishing in that first 90-day cycle, or in any 90-day cycle that they have for their OKRs. Now, to take this a step further, I wanted to show you a visualization using a sports analogy. Now, I know not everyone out there is a sports enthusiast. I'm not that great of a sports watcher myself, but put this into the context of whatever sporting event that you want to take on. So we have the head coach of a football team, right? Now, their main objective is to win the championship. Now, remember, the objective is motivational, it's inspirational. Who doesn't want to win a championship if they're playing in the NFL, National Football League? Now, that's inspirational, that's motivational, but it doesn't really tell us what we need to do to win the championship. That's where key results come into play. So the key results here are passing attack amasses 300 plus yards. Defense allows fewer than 17 points per game. Special teams unit ranks in top 3 in punt returns. Now, the important part of these key results is where we're going next, right? So the head coach has his objectives or her objectives, and then he has his key results underneath it. Now, we see on the right here, we have a special teams coach, we have an offensive coach, and then we have a defensive coach. Now, if we look at their objectives, they should look very familiar, because what those individual coaches are doing is they're pulling from the head coach, aka the company's OKRs, and they're turning that coach's key results into their objectives. That's where the cascading and alignment falls into play, because literally each goal is coming from the goal above them. And so whenever they achieve their goals on the lower end or the lower levels of the company, they then help that manager achieve their goals, and then it continues to go up until we meet the head coach or the company OKR. So let's go back to the image here on the screen. Key result, special teams. The key result for the coach is special teams unit ranks in top 3 in punt return coverage. Special team coach's objective is improve to top 3 ranking for punt coverage team. You can see where it's adapted a little bit, but it's very much just like the key result. You want to make sure that they're aligned. They don't have to be exactly word for word, but you want to make sure that they inspire your team to focus on what they need to focus on. And then underneath, we have their key results: allow fewer than 10 yards per punt return, block 4+ punts over the season. These are clear key results that are measurable based off of what the team does. Now, the reason I say the action plan earlier in this presentation is because allow fewer than 10 yards per punt return, is an outcome. Underneath it, you really need to go into the nitty gritty and say, okay, how do we actually do that? What do we specifically need to do on our list to make sure that we allow fewer than 10 yards per punt return? Now, I'm not going to go through the rest here. The main purpose of this is to help you get a visualization of how to create your objectives and key results. You take your head coach or your company OKRs, objectives, they have their key results. From those key results, the next level down takes that key result and turns it into their objective. And you continue that all the way down into the team or the individual contributor, depending on how you want to use the framework. Now, this is a little bit step further into the OKR program development. You don't need individual people to hold these. You can have multiple people, or you can have an individual person along with an executive sponsor whenever it comes to building out your program. So the ones that we're talking about here and the way that we do it at IMEO is we have an OKR champion. They're also known as the OKR program manager. They're going to be the leader who drives every single initiative for OKRs in the company. So they're going to be working with the executives, the CEO or the founder of the company to help build and implement and make sure that the framework stays consistent and sustainable throughout the entire program. And it's never ending, right? Because you always have a new strategy or you always have a goal that you're trying to accomplish. This is just a specific way that you can make sure that you're able to track and measure and make sure that you're achieving what you set out to avoid those statistics that we saw in the beginning of this presentation. Now, the executive sponsor is almost the most important, even though they're doing the least amount of work as far as OKR adoption and the process. But the reason that this is most important is because that executive is going to be the one who gets the other executives to buy into OKRs, right? Now, that executive could be the founder, it could be the CEO. It just needs to be someone who people respect and listen to when it comes to processes or changes, or just in general, when somebody says this and then they do that. You want to have somebody who's a great leader, who people trust and respect, so they can adopt this framework. Now, the OKR committee could fall into one person. It could fall into each person on a department. Now, this isn't their only title. This is an addition to their role. So if you're trying to give people growing opportunities in your organization and they feel interested or they're intrigued by OKRs, you can put that person on the OKR committee. Now, this group is going to serve as the voice of the employees around any feedback or improvements to the OKR program. And this is how you really continuously get people to buy in to the OKR approach, right? Because you're actually getting feedback from real employees, their real voice, and you're not only keeping it in a silo, you're being very transparent. We're saying, okay, the OKR committee conducted this survey or they spoke to the individuals in the organization. This is the feedback that we heard, and this is how we're going to apply it. Right? So if you take that approach, you're going to start to gain trust and buy-in from everybody in the organization, even the ones who are possible disruptors or resistors, right? Anytime that you allow the employee to have a voice that is heard and then acted upon, you're going to gain that trust and buy-in. Now, the last one is the OKR super users. Now, this is going to be more of like your admin type people. If you have an OKR software that you're leveraging, you want to have OKR super users that can go around and be the go-to for that specific software. So if a leader is having an issue uploading their OKRs into the system, they would go to employee XYZ. Again, this is a good growth opportunity if somebody's interested in OKRs and they want to step into a higher responsibility role. It's not going to be their only role, much like the OKR committee, but it's going to be a way for them to take on responsibilities, work with executives, work with everybody in the team as a liaison to help them make sure that one of the reasons that OKRs aren't adopted is not because of the technology. Right. So as I mentioned before on this slide, it doesn't have to be an entire team to take on all these roles. I've participated in the past as being the OKR champion, the OKR committee, the OKR super user. So you can do it as one person plus the executive sponsor, or if you're large enough and you have the bandwidth, you're able to have one key person who is the program manager of the OKR, which is the OKR champion, or and then you can have an OKR committee and an OKR super users, or you can combine the committee and the super users together. It all depends on what you're trying to do and what your culture is at your company. Now, some of the last pieces on the process that I wanted to talk about are these 4 best practices that I've mentioned earlier. Now, this is the way that you make sure that your goals are being tracked and managed every single day, every single week, every single month, and then every single quarter. And you do this quarter over quarter, which equals a year. And then ultimately, you're able to feel more comfortable in the ability to achieve the strategy that you defined earlier or at an earlier stage. So the first best practice is to encourage your employees to review your goals every single day. So once you create them, you want to make sure that these stay in the top of the mind of the employee. So a good business process has a well-defined starting point and ending date or ending point. It also has a finite number of steps. So what we're talking about here is making sure that the employees are coming in and they're checking what they have to do that day and that week. Then it goes into step 2, which is make sure that you bring up OKRs in your one-on-ones. If you're a manager or you're a leader, you know that what you say to your employees ultimately becomes the most important thing to them. So if you're constantly bringing it up in your one-on-ones, they know that this is important to the company and to their manager, so they're going to focus more on it. Also bring it up in team meetings, because one-on-ones are great to have those intimate conversations where that employee can speak up and tell you roadblocks without being embarrassed of speaking it in public to a group of people. But team meetings is a way to have people speak up and potentially help out or talk about a way that they did something in the past whenever they had a similar goal. Right? So you want to be able to combine the one-on-ones and team meetings and bring up the OKRs there. Now, the third one is interquarterly scoring. We call it interquarterly scoring. An easier way to think about it is monthly scoring. So every single month, the employee is going to go into whatever OKR software system that you have, and then they're going to update 1 to 2 sentences on each objective and key result, outlining the score that they think they're at. So are they at 50%? Are they at 35%? Are they at 75%? Are they at 100%? And then in those 2 sentences, you just want to add a little bit more detail, especially if you're on the 35% or 30 and below. You want to make sure that your manager understands what are some of the roadblocks or the issues that you're having. And then that way, as a manager, as we mentioned before, you can go into your one-on-ones based off of this feedback and really go into deep detail on how you can help that employee. Now, this is another thing. These first 3 is another way to improve a 360-degree review of somebody's performance, because you're not waiting a full quarter. You're not waiting a full month. You're speaking to them every single week. Hopefully it's either a week or bi-weekly for one-on-ones, that you can make sure that they understand where they stand in what they're trying to do. And now this is also great because we know that feedback for an employee is also an engagement increaser or enhancer. So whenever we have these conversations, we're saying we care and we want you to achieve your goals. and also we care about the company. And that feedback helps them course correct their own actions faster rather than waiting for a 360-degree view or an annual review. Now, the last one here is compounding results, but you're really scoring your final score for that quarter OKR session or your 90-day cycle. Now, we have this hard timeline because, as we know, there's a quote out there by Elon Musk. If you give somebody 3 months to clean the house, it's going to take them 3 months to clean the house. But if you give them 3 hours to clean the house, it's going to take them 3 hours. And that's what we're doing with having a time-bound approach on specific goals. And you'll see, once you start to get this underway where everybody understands it, the employees start to take that accountability. They own it because they helped create their goals themselves. And now they have an attachment to that goal, not only because they created it themselves, but they also know that what I focus on today is going to go into the ultimate goals of the company and what we accomplish. And this is the last part. I've sprinkled this throughout the entire presentation, but the key benefits of OKRs is that you're going to have increased company productivity and better performance management, mainly because you're aligned and focused and committed to the strategy of the company, what the company is trying to accomplish. And you're not viewing it as a 3 to 5 or 10-year long term. You're reviewing it as a reverse engineered approach to what do we have to do in the next 365 days. And then in this specific 90-day cycle time period. And by breaking it down like that, we all know that if you take a huge project and you break it down into simple steps, you're more likely to achieve that goal, especially if you're tracking and measuring it along the way. Now, that's how you increase company productivity and have better performance management. But on the tail end of that, you're also having enhanced employee engagement from many of the things that we've already talked about. But mainly, you're having those conversations with your employees around any struggling areas, or you're celebrating their successes whenever they succeed in an OKR, or you're also having the ability to give employees feedback on what it is that is most important and avoid having just that once a year conversation where they feel like they're hit blindsided with all the feedback that you have, especially if they're underperforming. So all of these things together combine to have a organization that achieves goals faster, grows with a purpose, and stretches for amazing. And I hope that this masterclass really walks you through how you can not only have a strategy, but take that strategy and feel more confident in achieving what you set out to instead of just having blind faith. My name is Zach Wright. I'm the founder and chief OKR coach at IMEO Company, improving management, employees, and organization. If you would like to learn anything further on the topic that we discussed today, feel free to reach out to me on my phone through text message or send us an email at info@imeoconsulting.com, or just learn more by visiting our website at imeocompany.com. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn more about strategy management and objectives and key results.